Good morning. This is Reverend Rich coming to you from First UMC of Bellevue here in Bellevue, Washington. Welcome to what is the third installment of our Faces of Our Faith worship series. It is spring here finally. We've got blue skies. It's not raining, so I can be outside a little bit. Beautiful blooms here. I don't know my trees, so I can't tell you what kind they are, other than white and pollen filled, as you can probably tell by my voice, but it's worth it. So for today, hit pause and dig out your Bible and go to the Old Testament and read Numbers. Yeah, we don't go there very often. Numbers chapter 27, verses 1 through 11. It is a story about the daughters of Zelophehad. Yep, that's a mouthful, Zelophehad. At least that's how we think it's pronounced, and we'll just stick with that for today. It's a shockingly, tragically relevant text for here and now. And it raises a question of how much do we value our daughters, right? Like, do we value our daughters as fully independent human beings deserving of equal rights under the law, the ability to determine their own lives, to make choices for themselves? So let me set the scene. So the Israelites are still wandering in the desert. Numbers has to do with Moses sort of numbering the tribes, but they're getting near the end of their sojourn in the desert, and they can feel that, and they're starting to think about what happens when they arrive in the promised land. And so the daughters of Zelophehad come. Their father had died, and he had not been part of some of the revolting that was happening during their time in the desert. But there were no sons to inherit after their father died, and we don't hear anything about the mother as well. And the 5 daughters go to Moses and say, shouldn't we inherit? Why does our estate, our father's estate, go to some distant relative who knows nothing of this? And it leaves us vulnerable, leaves us penniless. Why? We're a faithful family. Shouldn't we inherit? Because the law before that says that they don't. So there was a law in place that says they don't inherit. It only goes to the sons. But they challenge that. They go, they bond together. You can almost imagine them marching into the temple arm in arm, like, here we are. We are asking for equal rights. We're asking to be considered as fully capable, just fully human, right? Fully human under the law, not lesser than where they had been before. They had been seen as less than, They were someone to be married off for gain somehow. And they go to Moses, and Moses, almost amazingly doesn't say, nope, the law is the law. And the story unfolds that Moses goes and talks to God, and God says, yeah, they should inherit. So Moses comes back and says, you can. And it's a powerful story on a lot of levels. One of it, and this is not the main point today, but what the daughters were asking for was an act of faith, because what they were kind of saying is, when we get to the promised land, we feel like we deserve this inheritance. And we have enough belief that we are going to get there that it's worth coming to Moses to talk about. Because they weren't there yet. There was nothing to inherit yet, because they were still just penniless, wandering in the desert without much wealth, without much property, any of that. So them coming forward was this kind of act of faith and assurance that we will get to the promised land. Now, the main part today that I think we really need to pay attention to is how they were treated under the law, because shockingly, tragically, if you look in the news today, we have all sorts of states, and not just on the East Coast, not in the South, even though that's the majority of them, Florida, I'm looking at you, and all of these, that seem to be looking at our daughters and our women, our mothers, our sisters, as less than human, as less than deserving of fairness under the law, less than capable of making decisions about their own bodies. And a lot of that is couched in terms of religion, right? You know, it's like it's presented as in, you know, like, well, we are pro-life, even though we are fine risking the lives of women who might be having a difficult pregnancy. And they bang on this religious drum, which is complete nonsense, because very early on in this number story, and very early on, we have precedents of divine law, you know, early law of women having equal rights as men. And this was a change. It was updated. The law, they looked at a law that was problematic and said, let's change it. And so for everyone that thinks there's only one way of being faithful and interpreting law and body autonomy and life autonomy, you're not right. Because in this one, we have direct from God through Moses a statement that women are completely equal in the eyes of God. And as such, they should have complete autonomy under the law, that they're not less than. They don't need a bunch of dudes that look like me making decisions for them. And I think that's important. And this sounds, I say this sounds preachy, but I guess that's what I do. And it sounds political, but it is political, right? Like there's no separation between the political life and life of faith and everyday life. It's all in a big messy soup. But I think this text is really important just because it sets the precedence for what we see play out in Jesus. So jump to the New Testament, and in Mark chapter 5, we have two different incidents. First, we have a woman who reaches out and touches the hem of his robe, a hemorrhaging woman. And he says, "Who touched me?" And they all point at her. And he looks at her and uses these words, and he says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well." And it's the only place other than what comes right after that where Jesus talks about daughters. And he encounters daughters. I mean, he encounters all sorts of daughters and all the women, but he says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well." But then just after that, he's approached to come to Jairus' house, and where Jairus' daughter they believe, has died. And Jesus goes to her and says, in this kind of cryptic, like, she is not dead, she's merely sleeping. And lays his hands on her and says, "Talitha kumi." Probably pronouncing that wrong, but it literally means like, little girl, get up. Daughter, get up. And acknowledges that she is worthy of life. She's worthy of healing. And in a society where she may not have been worth that much, right? And so we have this, you know, this melody, this rhythm throughout the Bible where we have people who were considered less than becoming claimed and named as beloved and sacred by God. And it's not just women. We see that of Gentiles, like we are outsiders and then we become insiders. And I think it's important as we live out our faith lives to make sure that as we look out at people that are not like us, as we look out at people who are not white and male and all of that and part of the dominant culture, to make sure that not just in our eyes, but in our societal institutions, in our governmental institutions, that they are named and claimed as equal, right? Like that is a work of faith, because that's one of the voices of faith that comes through our biblical text. So that's our call today. That's our text for today, and it's worth us spending time with. So hope it is spring where you're at. If this made you mad, I'm not going to apologize about it, because maybe you need to be made mad. It's important for us to deal with this stuff. So blessings to you, shalom to you, and see you next week.